The horizon of Allura 3 was a canvas painted with swirling nebulae, their vibrant colors reflecting off the towering spires of the research citadel. This sacred hub of knowledge had long been a place of discovery, where beings from across the galaxy came to learn and share. Today, however, it was brimming with more anticipation than ever before. Hovercraft from distant star systems zipped through the atmosphere, their pilots, some mechanical, others living sentients, all drawn to the same legendary event, the study of the lost warship of Amrith, an ancient war vessel said to hold unimaginable power. On the floating platform overlooking the main hall, a glowing hologram displayed the warship, its form both magnificent and terrifying. The vessel, encased in a shimmering force field, was a relic from an era long forgotten, its design so complex they seemed to defy all known engineering principles. From the murmurs of excited onlookers, it was clear that the event was more than just an academic pursuit. It was a moment of reverence, of untapped potential waiting to be unlocked. Aliens of every shape and form gathered in the center of the citadel, towering giants with bodies that seemed to shift between liquid and solid, ethereal beings that glowed like living stars, and insectoid creatures whose chittering voices filled the air with an unsettling rhythm. Each one had come with their own expertise. Biologists hoping to study the life forms that once served on board, technomancers eager to decipher the ship's arcane weaponry, and historians wishing to uncover the stories hidden in its forgotten corridors. But as the countdown began, a palpable shift hung in the air. The warship's secrets were almost within reach, yet those who had come to study it were beginning to feel a creeping sense of dread. As the clock ticked down to 0, none of them could have known that they were about to awaken something that had long been sealed away, something that, once unleashed, might never be stopped. Carter wasn't supposed to be here, the youngest and most inexperienced scholar from Earth. She'd only made the cut for this research expedition due to a mix of sheer luck and her uncanny ability to talk her way into things. She stood at the edge of the bustling research citadel, looking out at the warship as the others busied themselves with their meticulous preparations. Where the other scholars donned sleek, high-tech suits designed for precision and professionalism, Cass wore nothing more than a worn hoodie and cargo pants, her hair tangled in a messy ponytail. Her datapad was cracked at the corner, and she carried a simple satchel slung over her shoulder, filled with half-used notebooks and a few loose pens. While the others were deep in thought, analyzing projections or discussing advanced theories in hushed tones, Cass leaned casually against the wall, sipping on a cup of steaming coffee from a local shop. "Hey, can someone tell me if this place has Wi-Fi? I need to check the status of a few, shipments," she asked, completely unfazed by the grandeur of the situation. The other researchers stared at her, unsure whether to be insulted or intrigued. This wasn't how scholars of intergalactic importance behaved. Cass, however, seemed utterly unbothered by their judgment. She had a reputation on Earth for her unconventional methods, focusing more on intuitive problem-solving than memorizing the ancient texts others studied so intently. Some dismiss her as a wild card and a distraction, but Cass was okay with that. She had learned that her gut often knew things her textbooks never could. As the others scrambled to prepare, Cass simply watched the ship, her eyes narrowing with a quiet curiosity. She had a strange feeling that the warship might not be what they all thought it was. And though she didn't fully understand why, she knew she was about to discover something others would miss, something that would change everything. As a research expedition to study the warship of Amrith officially began, the atmosphere shifted from one of wonder to one of quiet, simmering tension. The experts had arrived with their own specialized equipment, each with their own set of skills honed through decades of study. Among them, the most revered was Professor Lyra Vantok, a high-ranking scholar from the prestigious Xenolinguistic Institute on the planet Kalen Prime. Lyra was a towering figure in the galaxy, known for her sharp intellect, precise methodology, and unyielding commitment to the correct ways of studying the unknown. With her tall frame draped in sleek, form-fitting attire and her silver hair pulled back into an immaculate braid, she radiated authority. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, were locked on the warship with a mixture of awe and analytical precision. Every movement she made exuded a sense of order, as though she believed the universe itself was a puzzle, just waiting for her to solve it. She will be the first to crack the warship's codes, murmured a voice behind Cass, a fellow researcher from a neighboring system. No one has ever been able to decipher the ship's technology like she can. Cass glanced over at Lyra, her eyes narrowing. The odds of Lyra being the one to uncover the warship's secrets were astronomical. No one had more experience, more prestige, or more resources at their disposal. Cass, on the other hand, was just a blip on the radar, a rogue from Earth, barely on anyone's radar, without the advanced tools or connections that the elite scholars had. But what Lyra didn't know, and what Cass had picked up on from the very first moment she saw the warship, was that the vessel didn't want to be studied. The ship's ancient tech was more than just dormant. It was alive in ways no one had yet understood. And as Cass stood there, quietly observing, a shiver ran down her spine. She could feel the warship's pulse, something no one else seemed to notice. The tension mounted. Professor Vantok was already briefing the team on how the research would proceed, her voice steady and authoritative. This ship was crafted with precision. It can only be understood through logic, patience, and the application of known principles. The ancient warlords who built it left nothing to chance. Cass couldn't shake the feeling that the warship wasn't interested in being studied according to Lyra's rules. The stakes weren't just academic anymore. The ship had its own plans, and if Cass didn't act fast, everything would spiral out of control, perhaps in a way that no one could stop. The odds were stacked against her. Cass wasn't a master scholar. She wasn't an expert in xenotechnology or linguistics, and she certainly didn't have the years of experience that Lyra did. But she had something else, an intuition, a feeling that there was more to this warship than anyone could predict. And as the countdown to the warship's first full scan began, Cass knew she had only one chance to prove it. As the research team gathered around the warship, preparing for the day's first set of scans, Cass stood off to the side, a cup of coffee in hand, her satchel resting lazily by her feet. The other scholars were busy calibrating their equipment, adjusting sensors, and running through detailed algorithms on their holographic screens. They moved with purpose, their movements swift and calculated, like a well-oiled machine. Meanwhile, Cass was lounging on a nearby bench, scrolling through her datapad, completely unfazed. She had no intention of rushing into the technical nitty-gritty of it all. "Hey, does anyone have an extra power cord? I swear, I forgot to pack mine," she called out nonchalantly. Professor Lyra Vantok, who was overseeing the project with her characteristic air of superiority, shot her a glare. "Cassidy, are you prepared for this mission?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a serious study. We must proceed with methodical caution. We don't have time for distractions." Cass grinned, not the least bit perturbed. "Methodical caution? I'm all for caution, just as long as there's room for a little improvisation. 2. Besides, I'm just here to make sure we don't miss anything." As the other researchers exchanged bemused glances, Cass kicked off her sneakers and pulled out a bag of chips from her satchel. "Anyone want some?" "I heard that snacks help stimulate the brain," she said with a wink. Most of the team didn't know how to respond. A few laughed awkwardly, but Lyra's scowl deepened. Cass could practically feel her brain ticking through a mental list of all the things Cass was doing wrong. Everything from her lack of preparation to her complete disregard for the usual protocols. Cass, however, didn't seem to care. She stood up, brushed some crumbs off her hoodie, and walked over to the warship, completely ignoring the elaborate setup around it. With a casual flourish, she tapped her datapad and started poking at the warship's outer shield with a few quick commands, looking as if she were debugging a game more than handling an ancient, sentient warship. Cass, you're not supposed to," one of the other researchers began, but Cass simply grinned and cut them off. "Relax, I got this," she said, tapping the pad again with a confident, yet entirely reckless air. To everyone's surprise, the warship's shield shimmered, responding to her touch in ways no one had anticipated. The other researchers gawked in disbelief, and Lyra's stern face twitched. "What did you just do?" she demanded, her voice rising with equal parts concern and confusion. Cass gave a mock salute, grinning like a mischievous child who just pulled off an elaborate prank. "I dunno, but it worked, didn't it?" For the briefest of moments, it seemed as though the warship itself was considering her actions. Then, as it decided to test her further, it emitted a low hum, a sound that vibrated through the floor, sending a ripple of unease through the group. "See? Totally fine," Cass added, her voice bubbling with excitement as she stepped back, hands in her pockets. The others were still standing frozen, unsure whether to celebrate or to reprimand her. They hadn't expected her to succeed, and certainly not in such an unexpected manner. But Cass didn't care for their judgment. To her, this wasn't about following the rules. It was about finding a way to make sense of something that seemed far beyond their understanding. With a final glance at the stunned faces around her, she raised her eyebrows playfully. "Now that we've got the warship's attention, who wants to figure out what the hell just happened?" And with that, Cass became the unlikely center of attention, her methods just as unpredictable as the ancient ship they were about to unravel. The first official test of the warship's capabilities came in the form of an intricate series of analyses and simulations. The team had agreed to begin by testing its defensive systems, utilizing various advanced technologies that had been designed to interact with the warship's enigmatic force fields. Each researcher was to try and trigger a response from the ship, using their specialized tools and methods to push the limits of its defenses. Cass, however, had other ideas. Her first match came against Thrax, an armored warrior from the planet Kyner, whose ability to manipulate kinetic energy had made him a prized asset in several galactic conflicts. Thrax was an intimidating figure, standing over 8 feet tall, with chrome-plated armor that glinted in the light. His hands crackled with raw power, and his every movement was calculated, as though he was always anticipating an attack. Cass, in contrast, was casually sitting on the floor of the observation room, legs crossed, sipping on a soda. As Thrax began adjusting his equipment with fierce precision, Cass stretched her arms overhead, yawned loudly, and then glanced over to Lyra with a wink. "Should I do the thing?" she asked, as if Thrax weren't standing right there, primed and ready. Lyra shot her a sharp look, but the others were too curious to stop her. "What thing?" one of the younger researchers asked. Without waiting for an answer, Cass stood up and sauntered over to the control station. Instead of selecting the highly advanced tools and gadgets the others were using, she grabbed a laser pointer from her bag. The room fell silent as she aimed the tiny red directly at Thrax's helmet. Thrax paused, his entire body stiffening as the laser that danced across his visor. He tilted his head slightly, trying to focus, but Cass wasn't done yet. With a cheeky smile, she started darting the dot back and forth in rapid movements, clearly enjoying confusion it was causing. Thrax's visor shifted as if trying to lock onto his massive hands reaching for it in frustration. "Hey, I think it's getting to him," one of the researchers whispered, half laughing. Thrax growled, his massive body vibrating with frustration. "What is this technique?" he demanded, his voice trembling with annoyance. Cass grinned, undeterred. "Just a little distraction to keep things interesting. Let's see if the warship likes a game of cat and mouse." Without waiting for a response, she turned her attention to the warship's force field, using the laser pointer to map a pattern on the shield surface. The shield rippled in response, and for the first time, it began to shimmer in unique patterns, as though the ship was reacting not to the tools, but to the playful chaos Cass had introduced. Thrax, still fumbling with the laser, that blinked in confusion. This isn't how it works. You need to focus." But Cass wasn't listening. She was too busy watching the warship, her face lighting up as the ship's shield reacted to her every movement. She glanced over at Lyra, who was now rubbing her temples in disbelief. "Guess it's my turn to get the warship's attention, huh?" Cass said, tapping her datapad casually. The shield, once indifferent and unyielding, now hummed in acknowledgement of her influence. "Impossible," Thrax muttered under his breath, stepping back, his aura of menace dimming for the first time. As he retreated to allow the next researcher to try, Cass leaned back in her seat, victorious and utterly unfazed by the massive power she'd just disarmed with nothing more than a laser pointer. Lyra crossed her arms, a frown still etched across her face. "This isn't over. You've only scratched the surface," she said, though even she couldn't mask a faint trace of unease in her voice. Cass just shrugged. "Sure, but let's see what happens when the warship plays along." The tension in the room was palpable as the next match began. This time, with an entire team of technomancers who were highly skilled in manipulating electromagnetic fields. But Cass wasn't worried. After all, she wasn't here to play by the rules. She was here to prove that sometimes breaking the rules was the only way to get response. With a half smile, she readied her laser pointer once more. Professor Lyra Vantok paced back and forth in the observation room, her hands clasped behind her back. The warship loomed in front of her, its pulsating shield still humming from Cass's reckless interference. Lyra's sharp gaze never left the ship, though her mind was far from the ancient vessel. She couldn't stop thinking about Cass, that human. Lyra had built her reputation on tradition, on precision, on following the steps, the methods, the strategies that had worked for centuries. She had learned that the universe operated by rules, and it was those rules that allowed beings to understand the most complex of mysteries. The warship was an enigma, yes, but it was one that could be unlocked with careful study, with respect for its systems, its structure. Cass, on the other hand, was an anomaly. Lyra watched the young woman again, lounging by the equipment, completely unfazed by the tension in the room. It wasn't that Cass was unskilled. No, she had an uncanny knack for understanding things that defied explanation. But that lack of method, that disregard for the precision and protocol that the others followed so carefully, it gnawed at Lyra's mind. As Cass used that ridiculous laser pointer, Lyra had felt her control slipping. The shield responded. It shimmered. It adapted. No one had expected that, least of all Lyra. The warship had always been an artifact of pure science, something that obeyed only logic and calculations. And yet, Cass had done something entirely unpredictable, something that disrupted the ship's response in ways no one had prepared for. It was as though Cass was negotiating with it, understanding it in a way that Lyra couldn't, or perhaps simply refusing to play by the same rules. Impossible! Lyra muttered under her breath, running through the analysis again in her mind. This human isn't breaking the rules. She's breaking the game. Cass wasn't trying to match intellect with intellect or power with power. No, she was operating outside of the system entirely. Lyra's long years of training had taught her to approach problems methodically, to analyze, to dissect, to control every variable. Yet Cass seemed to operate on pure instinct, on something deeper, something that Lyra couldn't grasp, and it unsettled her. As Lyra observed Cass laughing with the other researchers, the thought that had been growing in the back of her mind took root. Cass didn't need to control the warship. She was letting the warship control her, and that, Lyra realized, was the real danger. Cass's unpredictability. Her refusal to play by the conventional rules of engagement was a threat Lyra couldn't plan for. She couldn't calculate it. She couldn't anticipate it. And as the team continued their tests, Lyra's irritation began to shift into something more dangerous: fear. The warship was more than an ancient weapon. It was a puzzle that demanded respect for its methods, its design. But Cass? Cass wasn't here to respect anything. She was here to break it. Lyra clenched her fists, her eyes narrowing. "This is not how this will go," she whispered to herself. "I'll find a way to control it, and I'll make sure she does not." The realization hit Lyra like a shockwave. Cass wasn't just a rogue element in the study of the warship. She was a new variable that threatened to change everything. And Lyra wasn't sure if she was ready to face that unknown. The atmosphere inside the research citadel's main chamber was electric, the hum of anticipation vibrating through the air. Spectators from dozens of worlds, alien beings from every corner of the galaxy, had gathered, their species represented in the vast array of seats surrounding the central platform. In the middle of the room stood the warship of Omrith, its shimmering force field still reacting to the team's interventions. The challenge was clear. The final test would determine not just who could unlock the ship's secrets, but who would take control of its unfathomable power. And for reasons no one fully understood, Cass Carter, Earth's wild card, was the last one standing. All around her, the established scholars, the technomancers, the military tacticians, and the xenologists were preparing for the grand finale. They moved with calculated precision, their faces tight with the knowledge that the stakes had never been higher. And yet, amid this intense display of discipline and methodical expertise, Cass was casually sipping her soda, sitting cross-legged on the floor and scrolling through her datapad as if she were at a coffee shop rather than the center of an intergalactic research endeavor. Lyra Vantock stood at the front, her lips pressed together in a thin line, every fiber of her being screamed to follow the rules, to enforce a tradition she had built her career upon. Her eyes scanned the room, her hand gripping the edge of the podium as she prepared to give the final command to activate the warship's deeper systems. But before she could speak, a murmur ran through the crowd. "Did you see that?" A Canorian scientist whispered, pointing to the screen. "She's not doing anything. She's not even touching the controls." "No, wait, look." The warship shield is reacting to her. It's responding. Cass had done nothing but sit there, her relaxed posture almost defiant in contrast to the tense precision of the others. The warship's shield rippled, bending and twisting in ways that defied any known principles of xenotechnology. A steady hum filled the chamber as the ship seemed to think, to process something no one could understand. "Impossible!" Lyra muttered under her breath. Her knuckles turned white as she clenched her fists. The ship had always followed its own protocols, method designed by long-dead warlords, but Cass's casual indifference was shaking the very foundation of everything Lyra thought she knew. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, whispering in disbelief. The betting markets, which had once been dominated by Lyra's name, now displayed only an ominous error message. Error does not compute. The odds had no meaning. Nothing about this was predictable. It was as if the very fabric of the game had unraveled. "Cass Carter has no technique," a voice in the back of the room muttered. "How did she even make it this far?" "She doesn't play by the rules," another voice responded. "She breaks them." Cass, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension around her, stood up slowly, her eyes still focused on the warship. She'd spent the entire challenge proving that she didn't need the fancy tech or ancient knowledge everyone else relied on. Instead, she was using her instincts, her gut feeling, something that no one had even considered. And now it was her moment. She slowly approached the warship's control station, taking one final look at the shimmering field in front of her. With a flourish, she tapped the screen in front of her, no instructions, no pre-calculated steps. It was a simple, bold action, completely different from the highly organized and controlled approaches of her competitors. As she did, a sudden, deep rumble filled the chamber, followed by a sharp hum that rattled the walls. The force field began to shift and dissolve, revealing a dark, glowing core hidden within the warship. The ship, for the first time, seemed alive, aware of the intrusion. A collective gasp rang through the room. Lyra's face turned ashen. "You've triggered it," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. This shouldn't be possible." But Cass only smiled, an almost mischievous glint in her eye. "I didn't break it. I understood it." The final showdown was no longer a matter of knowledge or technology. It was a battle of wills. As Cass advanced, the warship systems reacted, pulsing and adapting to her every move. The audience was silent, completely captivated by what was unfolding. The warship, which had once been a symbol of total control, was now bending to the will of a single human who refused to play by anyone's rules but her own. Lyra watched, her frustration growing as her traditional methods fell apart. She had been taught that knowledge was the key. Cass had proven that sometimes trusting yourself was enough. And as the warship's core began to pulse with eerie energy, Lyra realized, with a sinking feeling in her gut, that this was no longer just about control. It was about survival. Cass wasn't just studying the warship. She was becoming part of it. The chamber crackled with energy as the warship's core pulsated ominously, its dark glow casting long shadows across the room. Cass stood at the center of the platform, her body tense, but her face serene, almost amused. Lyra stood across from her, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed in calculation. The tension between them was palpable, two worlds colliding. Cass, a chaos-driven wild card, and Lyra, a scholar who had spent a lifetime perfecting tradition. "You've pushed it too far, Cass," Lyra said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "This is no longer a game. The warship, this entity, is beyond you." Cass raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Maybe, or maybe it just doesn't care about your rules." She took a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving Lyra. You can keep fighting for control, or you can feel it like I do. Lyra's lip curled in a sneer. Control is everything. Precision is everything. If you just follow the procedures, we could unlock its true potential. But instead she gestured toward Cass with a wave of disdain. You think you can improvise your way through this. You're making it worse. Cass chuckled, taking another step forward, her hand resting casually on the control panel. Tell you what, Lyra, I think I've got a better shot at making sense of this thing than you do. Before Lyra could respond, the warship's core shifted again, its dark glow intensifying. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floor, making the walls seem to pulse. It was as though the ship itself was reacting to Cass, as if it recognized her in a way it didn't with the others. Lyra's eyes widened. It's responding to you? She asked, incredulous. Cass smiled slyly. Yeah, I guess you could say we're on the same wavelength. Lyra's frustration mounted. She raised her arms and shouted, You don't understand. This isn't some simple game of give and take. You can't just feel your way through something this dangerous. We need structure. With a sudden movement, Lyra pulled out an ancient artifact, a crystalline relic from Kalen Prime, that was supposed to interface directly with the warship systems. She slammed it into the central control terminal. The ship's energy surged, and the air crackled with power. I will unlock this once and for all, Lyra declared, her voice shaking with the weight of her words. She began manipulating the relic, weaving it through a series of delicate commands on the terminal, her fingers flying over the interface with practiced precision. The warship reacted violently, the force field snapping to life around it. The room shook, and sparks shot from the terminals. Lyra's face flushed with triumph. See? Precision works. Control works. Cass watched, unfazed. She wasn't interested in controlling the warship with technical wizardry. Instead, she stepped forward, almost nonchalantly, and pulled out her trusty laser pointer from her pocket. You're really overcomplicating this, you know, she said with a grin. Lyra's eyes locked onto Cass with disbelief. You're going to play with it? Oh, I'm going to do more than play, Cass replied, her finger moving the laser to cross the ship's shimmering force field. I'm going to make it think. Cass began moving the laser pointer in random patterns, the small red flashing across the surface of the ship. At first, nothing happened, but then the warship's core began to pulse in a syncopated rhythm, its energy fluctuating with the erratic movements of the laser. The shield flickered, and the hum in the air changed tone, as though the ship was trying to follow the unpredictable motion of the dip. Impossible, Lyra muttered, her hand still clutched around the relic. It's not supposed to... But Cass was already a step ahead. She took a deep breath, then tossed the laser pointer into the air. As it spun, she flicked her fingers in an exaggerated arc. The warship's force field followed her motion, its pulse echoing her gestures. It wasn't controlling the ship, it was dancing with it. The energy surged suddenly, and the warship's shield warped, expanding outward in an intricate pattern. The ship was adapting, not to the relic, but to Cass's movement, her randomness, her chaos. The core flared to life with blinding brilliance. Lyra took a step back, her eyes widening with horror. What are you doing? This isn't how it's supposed to work, she shouted, her voice now trembling with panic. I think we're finally figuring it out, Cass said, her voice light but resolute. This warship doesn't need to be controlled by tradition. It needs to be understood. The warship's force field now twisted and shifted, reflecting Cass's chaotic, free-form movements. Lyra's relic was still pulsing, but the power no longer seemed to be flowing through it. Instead, it was a ship alive with energy, now syncing perfectly with Cass's instincts. With a sudden crack of energy, the ship's shield evaporated entirely, leaving the central core exposed. The ship's power surged with a deafening hum, and the chamber filled with a blinding light. Cass stood in the center, unshaken, as the warship responded to her with a near-sentient grace. Lyra, breathless and shaken, watched in stunned silence. No, it's not possible. Cass turned to her, a playful smile curling at the corner of her lips. Maybe for you, but for me, it's just another day at the office. As the core settled, The light dimmed and the warship systems powered down in a peaceful, almost contented manner. The crowd, once silent, burst into awed whispers. The ship was no longer a weapon of destruction. It had become an enigma, a living entity that had chosen its ally in the most unexpected way. Lyra, shaking, took a step back. "You've broken it." "No," Cass replied, turning toward the stunned audience. "I've just made it my partner." The tension was palpable as Cass looked over at Lyra one last time. "See, Lyra, you were so focused on being precise that you missed the point. It's not about control. It's about understanding." As the room erupted into hushed murmurs, Cass grinned, knowing that the warship, for all its power and ancient mystery, had finally met its match. And it wasn't with precision or tradition. It was with the unpredictable brilliance of someone who dared to break the rules. The warship's core, now calm and still, pulsed gently in the center of the chamber. The force field had vanished. The once unyielding shield now nothing more than a faint ripple in the air. Cass stood at its center, her posture casual, her face lit with a quiet, almost triumphant smile. She had done it. The warship, once a mysterious relic, a weapon of ancient warlords, had bent to her will, but not through force, not through rigid control. She had simply understood it in a way that no one else could. Around her, the researchers and spectators were still processing what had just transpired. Whispers rippled through the room, and the weight of what they had just witnessed settled over them like a storm. The warship was no longer an object to be mastered. It was an ally to be understood. And the one who had understood it? A human who had no right to be there, according to rules they had all lived by. Lyra Vantock stood at the back of the room, her face a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. She had watched everything unfold, her tightly controlled world crumbling in front of her. For the first time, she understood that precision and control, those things she had dedicated her life to, could not always account for the unpredictable, the chaotic, the human element that had just broken the facade of scientific order. Cass looked over at Lyra, her voice steady but with a hint of playfulness. "You know, you were right about one thing," she said. "The warship is powerful, but I think it's better being alive than anyone realized." Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line, but she couldn't deny the truth in Cass's words. The warship had reacted with unprecedented autonomy, because Cass had treated it as something more than just a tool. It had responded to her unpredictability, to her refusal to bow to the established rules. In that chaos, in that openness to evolution, she had found a connection others had missed. Cass turned to face the rest of the crowd, her eyes scanning the faces of the other researchers. There was no arrogance in her gaze, no sense of, "I told you so." Instead, there was a quiet understanding. She hadn't just changed the way they viewed the warship. She had changed the way they would have to approach discovery itself. Methods and rules were important, yes, but they couldn't be the final word. Change didn't come from rigid precision. It came from adaptability, from seeing opportunities in what was unexpected, even chaotic. For a moment, there was silence in the room. Then, slowly, one by one, the spectators began to nod in acknowledgement. Some were still uncertain, still hesitant to embrace the idea that the rules they had followed for eons weren't the only way. But others, the younger researchers, the more open-minded ones, saw the light. They saw that there was more discovery than method. It was about intuition, about feeling the unknown, about being willing to fail, to adapt, and to find new paths where none had been charted before. Lyra walked up to Cass, her eyes serious but softer than before. "You've disrupted everything," she said, her voice low. "And I don't think we'll ever go back to the way it was." Cass nodded, her smile easy. "Good. We're not supposed to. Perfection doesn't leave room for evolution. It doesn't leave room for growth." Lyra's scales shifted, her body language softening in a rare moment of reflection. "Maybe you're right. Maybe there's something here that we've all missed." Cass's grin widened. "Exactly. Rules aren't limits. They're opportunities. And now we get to figure out what happens next." As Cass turned to leave the chamber, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what she had done. The warship was more than just a puzzle solved, more than just a victory won. It was a shift, a challenge to the established norms of the galaxy, and she had been the one to lead it. The journey was far from over. But for the first time, Cass felt like she was walking into the unknown with the right kind of confidence. Unpredictable, adaptable, and ready to break every rule that stood in her way. And as the warship's pulse softened into the background, it felt less like a relic and more like a partner, alive, aware, and ready to chart new worlds alongside her. As the warship's core dimmed, its pulsing light slowly fading into the background, Cass stood at the center of the chamber, her hands tucked into her pockets. The air hummed with the weight of what had just transpired. Her unconventional methods had not only unlocked the warship's secrets, they had shattered the very notion of what was possible. But Cass knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. Outside the Citadel, ships from every corner of the galaxy were already heading back to their home worlds, their crews carrying the news of what happened, of a human who had been an ancient warship to her will, with nothing more than intuition and chaos. The ripple effects were just starting to spread, but Cass didn't need to wait for the full wave to reach her. She already felt it coming. A new era of exploration, of discovery, was about to begin. The warship was a key, one that had been waiting for the right person to turn it. And now that it had been unlocked, there would be those who sought to understand it, control it, even wield it. But the galaxy had learned something crucial today. Cass Carter had no interest in following the old ways. She wasn't here to play by anyone's rules. Her datapad buzzed with a new message. She glanced at the screen. Incoming transmission. Federation Council. She smirked, tapping the message open. Looks like they've got more questions than answers. Well, I guess it's time to really see what humanity can do. With a final glance at the still glowing warship, Cass couldn't help but grin. The galaxy might think it was ready for her next move, but they had no idea what was coming. Mission accomplished. Send the rest. And with that, the next chapter of Cass Carter's adventure was about to begin, and this time, it wouldn't be just a warship that would be waiting for her. Entire galaxies would be watching. The game had changed. If you want to tell any stories of your own choice, let me know in the comments for the next video. Don't forget to subscribe for more exciting content.